This video is sponsored by Flexispot. Warhammer 40k has never been so good or so playable. 10th edition is a very, very well-balanced, functional game of Warhammer 40,000 where all of the factions feel decently balanced, have some fun army rules, and everything kind of works. But I feel like in Games Workshop's quest to make a better and better and better Warhammer 40k game, they forgot a little bit about the experience. I've played so much 10th edition at this point that the game is starting to feel just a little bit bland, and I think that that has to do with the rules writing. Warhammer 40,000 10th edition feels like a video game. It works very well, the armies are decently balanced, and the games kind of play out how you would expect them to. But I think Games Workshop forgot that they're a tabletop war game, and tabletop war games are different than video games. In a video game, the computer does all of the math for you and making sure that the game actually works, leaving you free to just play the game. But a tabletop war game asks a little bit more of its players. You actually have to read the rules, understand the rules, and then do the rules on the tabletop. And when those rules are just kind of mathematical probability chances, it works, it plays very well, but I think that those rules are a lot better when they're just the silliest, weirdest stuff. I think the perfect example of this is taking a look at what I think is the pinnacle of Games Workshop rules writing, and that is way back in good old 6th edition Warhammer 40k, Chaos Space Marines. I think this is actually my buddy's book, and I stole it from him years ago, but back then there was the Chaos Boon table. At the start of the game, if you had a Chaos hero in your army, you could roll on the boon table. You rolled a D66, which was 2 dice, and then one of those dice was your 1 value, and then one of those was your 10 value, and then you would compare the results of those dice to the beautiful chart. And this chart has a lot of fun stuff on it. You could get +1 toughness, you could get shrouded, you could get something called adamantium will, which I don't remember what that does, but back in 6th edition, there was like 200 like universal special rules. But if you rolled a double ones, you became, actually, if you rolled a double ones, nothing happened. But if you rolled a double twos, you replaced the model with a chaos spawn. The gods do not favor you. You are not favored by the forces of chaos. And so you replace whatever character it is with a spawn miniature. And then that's the first thing you do at the start of the game. You just play the game like that. But if you rolled double sixes, you replace that model with a demon prince. I remember my buddy rolling for this for every one of his like chaos cultist champions, because you always hope that you'll start the game just like unfairly, you'll start the game with a chaos demon prince. And that's a lot of fun. I remember us all sitting around eating Doritos at the start of the game, rolling on this chart to see what's gonna happen. What is our afternoon gonna be like? I mean, usually not that much would happen. You'd get +1 toughness, but sometimes he turns into a chaos spawn, and then you just play the game like that and you hope that that chaos spawn does something at least a little bit interesting. Or you start the game unbalanced. You start the game where one person has an extra demon prince in their army. You know, even if he wasn't bringing a demon prince in that battle, the demon prince was on the side table because you never know, he might get tagged in. This adds so much fun and flavor to the game of Warhammer 40k, even though it isn't particularly balanced. I mean, how many points is it worth to roll on the boon table? It's hard to say because it's completely random what's gonna happen. And Games Workshop noticed this randomness and how hard that is to balance, and so they rewrote the rule in 10th edition. Nowadays, this rule has been rolled into something called Dark Pact. Each time a unit is selected to shoot or fight, you take a battleshock check. And no matter what happens in that battleshock check, you get to select one of 2 abilities, sustained hits or lethal hits. And if you fail the battleshock check, you still get to have whatever benefit you want, but you take D3 damage. Taking D3 damage, that's a little fun and flavorful, but it's a little weird that the rule still goes off even if you fail the battleshock check. And I think it's a little bit lame that you get to pick. So basically every time you do something, you have to decide, do I just want to have lethal or sustained hits? and lethal and sustain hits just make your dice probability better. And you would pick one depending on if you throw a lot of dice or a small number of very good quality dice. This rule is really, really good. It's objectively better, and you probably can easily come up with how many points is this rule worth. But it doesn't add anything. It doesn't make the game more textured and fun. It just is a really good rule that you can't even fail if you fail a battleshock check. In battleshock check, I think I like battleshock checks as opposed to morale, because morale usually just meant, oh no, I'm playing orcs today, and so my orcs are gonna run away if I get shot at. Meanwhile, now taking a battleshock check is you can't hold objectives, and you can't have stratagem spent on you. Those are good effects, but everything in 40k actually has pretty good leadership. Even stuff that's bad, like orcs and guard, you've got a better than not chance of passing your battleshock check, and there's not that many things that actually force you to take a battleshock check. And sometimes, even when you do have to take a battleshock check, it doesn't matter. And Games Workshop even made battleshock checks not matter that much because there is a core book stratagem that lets you automatically pass a battleshock check. So that one time in the game where it actually mattered, you can be like, oh, rats. All right, I'm gonna auto pass it. And Games Workshop knows that this kind of invalidates the rule, so for some reason, that stratagem can only be spent by each player once per battle. It's a little bit of a mess. A lot of the fun and flavor has been taken out of Warhammer 40k. There are still a couple of rules that I think are really fun and flavorful, and we'll get to those. But first, you might have noticed, I am extremely comfortable right now, and that is because of today's sponsor, Flexispot. Has this ever been you, sitting in an old stool, working away at your computer, and your back is hurting again? Your chair is old, worn out, torn up, and just asking to be replaced? You need to care for yourself and your back. Get rid of that old chair and get yourself a C7 Max from Flexispot. The C7 Max is great because it lets me sit the way I want with the comfort I need. I've looked for chairs before, but found those other bulky chairs don't have the support I need. The C7 Max has wide, large, latex padded seat cushions with an adjustable depth and adaptive support, which is great for my lower back. The upper and lower sections are fully adjustable to fit my neck and back for the best comfort, and it helps keep my posture right while I'm working at my desk all day. And then at the end of the day, when I need to relax, the C7 Max has me covered, with the 4-level lockable backrest and extendable footrest. Finally, when it's time to kick my feet up, I can really mean it. If you're not satisfied within 30 days, there's a risk-free return policy. If you ever break your C7 Max, don't worry either because there's a 10-year warranty for broken parts. So use the code 24BFC7 today to buy the C7 Max with a $50 discount. A big thanks to Flexispot for sponsoring this video. I think one of the best rules in Warhammer 40k right now is the Drukhari's Pain Token ability. This is the Dark Eldar army ability, and it's really, really good. It works really, really well, and it's really, really fun to play with, and most importantly, flavorful. At the start of the game, you get a certain number of pain tokens, but the real way you get them is you cause pain. Every time one of your Dark Eldar units kills one of your opponent's units or makes them fail a battleshock check, you get a pain token. And these pain tokens can be spent in any phase to make your guys just a little bit better. And what's great is this creates a really fun loop of trying to spend pain tokens in order to get more pain tokens so that you can spend those pain tokens to get more pain tokens. It works really, really well, and it's so much fun. And I love, every time my opponent does a battleshock check, I'm looking over his shoulder and I'm being like, I really hope you fail it because then I get a pain token and Lilith's gonna hit a little bit better the next time she punches you. It's so much fun. It works really, really well. I think it actually is mathematically functional. Like, it actually works as a decently balanced rule that Games Workshop can say, okay, everything that can take a pain, that gets the power from pain ability is probably worth 2 or 3 extra points in our, in the behind the scenes points cost of these units. I think it is just A+ top tier miniature wargame ability. And I think a really good opposite of this really well written rule is the Leagues of Votann Power from the Ancestors? Eye of the Ancestors ability. This one, very similarly, is a fun and flavorful way to have your little Votann guys be a little bit better, and that is with their grudge tokens. See, they were trying to do the tokens thing again, but it didn't quite work. Every time a Leagues of Votann unit gets killed, you give whatever killed it a grudge token, and that grudge token, that enemy unit can have up to 2 grudge tokens. the rest of your army gets a little bit better at fighting that thing. Not quite as much fun because you have to lose your own models to start handing out these grudge tokens. And you don't want to you want to be handing out a lot of grudge tokens, but you kind of don't want to be handing out a lot of grudge tokens because that means a lot of your units died. And so this was very underpowered at the start of 10th edition, and Games Workshop realized it was underpowered, so they did a hot fix. And that was at the start of the battle, you get to pick 4 enemy units, and each of those enemy units just for free gets 2 grudge tokens. So at the start of the game, you're handing out 8 grudge tokens to the better part of your opponent's army, which makes the rule good. But it doesn't make sense. Like, my Votann guys hate my entire opponent's army, not just those 4 things. It doesn't, they tried to do the same thing as the blood tokens, but it didn't quite work. And it'll be interesting to see when Leagues of Votann get their own codex, if they rework this rule or just come up with something brand new. I bet it gets a rework, but a rework that's essentially something brand new. The importance of really fun rules is to make sure that no matter what happens in the battle, you get to have fun with your models. And, sustained hits or +1 to attack or force a battle shock check aren't necessarily things that, when you're curled up in your really nice chair with your codex, those sorts of rules don't flim your flams. They don't jimmy your jams. You read them and you're like, yes, this squad is a little bit mathematically better than that other squad. Or maybe I can take this squad to mathematically make this squad a little bit better. And that's fun for list building, but when you read a rule, like Necron Scarab Swarm Self-Destruction, if you're in close combat with your Scarab Swarms, you can just decide to blow one up and do some mortal wounds. Is that even good? Not really. D3 mortal wounds almost never they never really turn the tide of combat, and it's probably better to actually have that guy alive, but I want to blow him up. That's funny. It's funny to be like, Sean, Angron takes D3 mortal wounds because this tiny little robot exploded on his foot. That's a really, really fun rule that makes me chuckle sitting here in this really nice chair. I don't have to actually play the game of 40k to enjoy that rule. It's already a lot of fun. Another really good rule, the Dark Eldar Archon, the hero of the Dark Eldars, he has a 2-up invulnerable save, which is unfair. That is way too good that he shrugs off all damage except for rolls of 1. But the first time he rolls a 1, that ability is gone. So this happened multiple times where I immediately roll a 1 right off the bat and that rule is gone forever. But it could happen where he just tanks the entire game on his shoulders. That's so much fun. That's really fun and flavorful that this one piddly little pointy-eared Eldar guy is just unstoppable until he's very much stoppable. Another really fun rule is the Jump, the Weird Boy's ability for the Orcs. Once per turn in your movement phase, you can select a Weird Boy and all of the guys attached to the Weird Boy, and the Weird Boy himself gets a little bit better the more boys he has attached to him. And you roll a d6, and on a 2-up, they get sucked off the battlefield and dumped anywhere in the battlefield more than 9 inches from the enemy. But D6 of them die. They don't necessarily die. They take D6 mortal wounds, but that pretty much means D6 of them die. It's hilarious that the orcs, the Weird Boy shaking his stick, he shakes it so vigorously that he opens a warp rift that sucks the boys into the nether place and then just dumps them out somewhere. I almost wish it dumped them out somewhere random, but that would be really hard to do in 40k because you do have to place, actually maybe if it was completely random, it wouldn't matter and just place them anywhere on the board. What if the rule was find a neutral third party and then have them put them somewhere on the board? It's not fair, but it also, you took D6 damage. And then it gets your buddy involved in the game. It would be so silly and fun. It kind of reminds me of the old Deathstrike missile that used to have infinite range. And so there's always, every Warhammer store has the story of people calling up and saying, I'm shooting the Deathstrike missile. It has infinite range. Can you just go over to whoever's playing 40k at the shop today and just have the missile land somewhere on their board? Because it has infinite range. Why can't it shoot across the county and hit on somebody else's wargaming table? Rules like that are just, they make you giggle and chuckle as you read them, and that's really, really important. The Jump is just a good rule. It can still fail, unlike the Chaos thing, because I think to make the game work well, Games Workshop does have to find a really, really hard balance between like mathematical probability and fun. I think though they're leaning way too hard on the math. Miracle dice, Eldar Fate dice. Miracle dice are probably the biggest problem of this. You roll a number of dice, and then you take those dice and you keep them on your sideboard, and you can swap them in and out depending on what you want to do during your battle. And this can sometimes be really lame. It's really good, but the problem is it's really good. I'm shooting my sister's melt-a-gun at a tank, and I'm really worried that this might whiff. Actually, I'm not, because I have a 5 and a 6. I'm just gonna swap those in, and I've automatically done the damage to you. It's really good, but it's not really fun. It takes the biting your fingernails and really worrying about this next dice roll. It kind of takes that away from you. Another really fun thing that is a little bit of a rule is Plague Marines can be taken in squads of 7. This is just a weird, silly thing that Games Workshop decided to do because 7 is Nurgle's number. And 7 is actually honestly kind of good in game, because you don't want to be 10, because then all vehicles that have like the big guns rule, they do extra damage to you. But you don't want to be 5, because then it's really easy for you to die. 7 is a little bit in the sweet spot. That actually kind of works out rather nicely and is fun and flavorful. Parasite of Mortrex is another really fun unit with a really fun ability that's not particularly good, but is really fun. They can, in close combat, sting an enemy model, and then it's like the movie Aliens. They stung the model, and so I think they have to roll a d6, and then they can set up a Ripper Swarm. So they stung an enemy model, and then the little creature Ripper grew inside of their body and then came out and is now a functional model on the battlefield. It's really weird, but it's really, really fun. And Killacan Power Trip. So Killicans are not bad in the game, but they do their Killacan Power Trip. Every time you select to shoot, you roll a d6, and on a 1 or a 2 something happens, a 3 or a 4 something happens, or a 5 or a 6 something happens. And the 1 or a 2 is just they hurt themselves. But what I really like about this is it's actually random. So you might have +1 to your strength, but that might happen to you in a time where you don't really care about your strength, you care about number of attacks. Or you might roll a 5 or a 6 and get extra attacks when really you want to do more damage. And so it can be mismatched. And so it's truly random. And so you're just praying to Gork and Mork to get a result that you might not get. I think that adds a lot of fun to the game. In reading all about Warhammer 40k and reading all of the indexes and all of the codexes and all of the army abilities and all of the army rules, I've been having a lot of fun because I jump from army to army to army to army, and I play a lot of tabletop simulators, so I don't even need the models necessarily. I can just play with all of these different armies, and I can get my fun that way. But if I was just stuck playing my Necrons or playing my Space Marines forever and playing with the exact same rules over and over and over, just getting lethal hits and sustained hits, I don't think I would be able to play 10th edition all the time, every single week. I think I would probably get burnt out. But if the rules were a little bit more fun and a little bit more flavorful, and weird, wacky stuff could happen during the game, I think it would be fun indefinitely, forever. One game that I've been playing a lot of, and it's really been Jimmy in my jams and Flimmy in my flams, is a little game called Moonstone, a skirmish game set in kind of a silly, whimsical world. But this game is just silly rules the game. 40k probably shouldn't be Moonstone, and Moonstone is a skirmish game. It's a little bit different than a full-scale army game, but just reading the cards gets me really, really excited to play the game. One of my characters, called Tito, can do Arcane Reflection. If somebody tries to shoot their magic at me, I can spend my energy to turn the shot back against the person who tried to shoot me. And so my opponent has to kind of decide, okay, you haven't activated yet, so you still have all your energy. Maybe I decide not to shoot you because you might be able to reflect that damage back onto me. Or maybe it's like, I'm gonna wait until you're done with all of your energy and then I'm gonna shoot you. It kind of forces the game to play a certain way. There's even a crazier rules like Herbert Growbottom. He can plant trees and then he can teleport to those trees he planted. That's great. I'm actually working on sculpting up some little trees so that I can play with this rule without using quarters for the trees. It's just a really, really fun, whimsical, silly ability that's not necessarily powerful in the game, but it's really, really fun to play. Oh, Belladonna. Belladonna is probably my favorite character that I have for my little Moonstone faction. In Moonstone, Moonstone actually doesn't roll dice to do things in the game. You actually pull from a deck of cards, and you can bluff about what you pulled, which also adds a really fun level of silliness to the game. But Belladonna, she has an ability where she can mind control the enemy model, and you don't want to be mind controlled. You really don't want to be mind controlled. So you probably want to try to call my bluff to see if I'm lying that I get to mind control you. But if you call my bluff and it turns out it was a catastrophe, my Belladonna and the unit getting mind controlled both die. So all of a sudden, you're really sweating. It's like, I don't want you to mind control me, but I also don't want my guy to just die. This is a no-win situation. And it's so great. All of these cards are really, really fun, and it makes the game feel different every single time we play it. I love seeing my opponent's units and them explaining all of the weird and wacky things that their models get to do. And it just makes it like, I'm excited for what is in store for this game. Where a lot of 40k games, especially like when I play Sean with my Space Marines against Imperial Guard for the 30th time, it's like, well, I think I know how this game's gonna go, but we'll see. But Moonstone is very different every single time. I think 10th edition, I've been poo-pooing it a lot, but I actually think 10th edition are some really, really good bones to build a war game off of. And we've seen 40k get these big mix-ups before. The last big one was 8th edition, and 8th edition was pretty good at launch, but it kind of grew into a little bit of a mess. I'm really hoping that there's kind of two things Games Workshop could do. Either use the bones of 10th edition, but bring back the flavor and the silliness of the rules, or just make it kind of two different games. There's competitive 40k, where everything is either a reroll, or that's kind of it, a reroll or just adding in more hits, or everything is a little bit sillier and more whimsical. But the bones of 10th edition are really good, and I'm really enjoying playing it. But it's not that much fun to read. Let me know in the comments below, what are some 40k rules that you really like or really miss? Actually, tell me which rules you really, really miss. The Boon Table one, for me, is one that I really, really miss. I played a lot of games against my buddies Cast Space Marines. I don't know if it ever happened. We might have forced it to happen once, just to see what would happen, starting with an extra Demon Prince, but let me know in the comments below, what are some fun rules from 40k's history that you really, really miss? Maybe I'll just play 6th edition one more time, just for the nostalgia. Thanks for watching. And don't forget about Flexispot and the C7 Max. Use the code 24BFC7 to save an extra $50 for their Black Friday sale.